Hello, everyone. This is Katrina Menzigian speaking. I'm Vice President with Everest Group, and I lead our Analyst Relations Engagement Program. Thank you for joining us and for our discussion today about supporting growth through proposal precision. And we'll spend some time talking about what we mean by that specific term of proposal precision. And the team to help me do that is joining me, and I want to thank them as well. So if we could go through a few intros real quick. My name again is Katrina Menzigian. I lead our Analyst Relations Engagement Program. And what that means is I represent Everest Group to the Analyst Relations community to make sure that we are working effectively with you in all things related to how you get your work done and how you build a relationship with Everest Group. And in that capacity, I work closely with a lot of our analysts. And I have 3 of our top analysts on the discussion with me today. We have Achint Arora, who's based in the New York, New Jersey area, and he's a partner with our, actually all 3 analysts are with our Commercial and Solution Analytics program and our body of research there and our work with clients. So Achint is in that helps lead that team, and he's based in the New York, New Jersey area. We have Rahul Gehani. Rahul is based out of one of our India locations and is a partner with the practice. And we certainly are happy to have Abhishek Sharma with us, who is a managing partner helping lead commercial and solutions analytics for Everest Group. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of background why we thought today's conversation would be relevant for our analyst relations audience. But before I do that, and as we are having folks join the call, since I kind of shared, and I'm in the Boston area, I forgot to mention that. So I'm on the East Coast as well. If you are, inclined to, let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know what part of the world you're representing, because some of the dynamics that our panelists will talk about actually have to do with other parts of the world and geographies and the costs and dynamics of those markets. So if we have a stronger sense of where you're all from, that'll be really helpful for us. But while you're doing that, I wanted to also kind of walk through the context of the market and how we see things evolving. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So a couple of different pieces of information on this slide. So one of the key messages here, though, is that while the IT services market has experienced a slowdown, and you can see that in the left side of your screen, that represents service provider growth year over year, revenue growth year over year. We had a peak, of course, in 2021, 2022. We saw, 21, kind of on an upward momentum, and then it kind of peaked in 2022, and then has continued to decline up until sort of the end of 23. And we've started seeing across geographies in the world that there's a little bit of a pickup in the growth rate of revenue. So that's one of the things that service providers and of different kinds have been facing in the marketplace. What that's meant is that the prices that providers have been able to bring to bear on their engagements in the marketplace have really not increased, for about a year and a half. You can see here in the upper right that it's held fairly stable, and our team will talk about that a little bit. But it's not just prices that have been affected by this dynamic. We're finding that the contract terms and the conditions that clients are looking for in this constrained environment have also been affected. And so if we look at the innovation fund, right, those are kind of staying stable. They're not increasing in terms of what companies are willing to put, what buyers are willing to put into their innovation fund. The earn back clauses, those have sort of gone down compared to the past. And so, when you look at what's happening with deals, you need to look at the price as well as the characteristics of the overall value of that contract. And so one of the things we're noticing is there is somewhat of a gap between what clients are looking for and what service providers are sort of positioning into the marketplace. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask, I'm actually going to target Achint for this, is, what are the gaps, more specific, that you're seeing in the discussions between providers' proposals and what their clients are looking for? Like, what are you finding is a challenge and a gap in the conversation?
Thanks, Katrina. I'll quickly start off with laying out a few facts. Whatever we see today, a lot of the behaviors that we see in pursuits in actual deals is providers carry a lot of legacy baggage in terms of the information and the postures they have followed for long, right? So if you see the example that we are sharing on the left, this is from an actual deal. What we saw was that, you know, there are two ends of the spectrum. Providers can be too conservative or they can be too aggressive. The one on the conservative side is that in cases where they are not an incumbent, often they are too conservative, saying that we don't know the client, right? But then also, what we understand is that all these providers through us, through their own sources, have a lot of information, a lot of treasure of data with them. But when it comes to the pursuit teams, they are not going to the level of analyzing that data. For example, they won't analyze that is my sector stress, if it is not stress, is it performing well to the level of the client itself, and that kind of gets reflected onto the deal behavior. So client asking for a vendor consolidation posture, client asking for clear cost saving, it's a distress sector. These were the classical examples of the one on the left. But the provider ended up giving a very conservative solution, very high rates, as if, you know, this is a good time to make money in market of today. And this is a situation where the provider couldn't even make to the next round, right? So it's always very important for the bid team, for the pursuant to be informed of who they are working for, who is the enterprise, the buyer in this case, and what are they gonna do about it, right? I mean, often it also happens that many of the providers are just referring to their internal data, right? They're not looking for outside help, and that kind of cost getting reflected onto their deal behaviors and eventually, losing those deals. The one on the right is an example from an existing relationship. So in this case, the incumbent, when it kind of got hold of that client almost 3 to 5 years ago, they went ahead with an aggressive approach. Now, we always think a vendor consolidation or any kind of a large RFP, the race to the bottom exercise. But that's not the case. We have often seen scenarios, when you go to the race to the bottom exercise kind of a situation, what always happens is that because you are pricing it so low, often you may not even be able to find the talent, right? And that spirals down into a situation where you're not able to provide talent, the governance go off the charts, the KPIs start getting missed, and that creates a suboptimal experience for the clients. And in effect, that also leads to a situation of loss, right? I mean, long term, it's loss both for the buyers and the service provider. For the service providers, it become a reputational risk, right? That if this is a large buyer logo where they have messed up, then that kind of gets reverberated in the market. So we are seeing that providers can be at both in the spectrum, right? People who are not taking outside help, they don't have a lot of outside in data, are losing more deals than the others, their peers who are taking that outside in data for their own benchmarking, right? So that's my thought process on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Achin. I think your comment reminds me that I wanted to highlight sort of why we thought this topic would be interesting for our analyst relations audience. The question that I often get is, how can analyst relations teams help their stakeholders be more competitive in the marketplace, right? And I know AR teams are generally not part of the pursuit team inside of an organization, but they do hear about the trends that are happening, the challenges that are happening. They're aware of the price pressures maybe their organization is facing. And our goal with today's session was to bring tools and resources to an AR professional to be aware of what some of their relationships with research firms could be, how that could be useful to their stakeholders. What are the resources that an AR professional has access to through their research relationships to bring to their organization? And so that was sort of the goal here today, is to outline the problem we're seeing in the market for your further knowledge and awareness, but also, how to think about what you can do to support that process and that problem. So with that framework in mind, I wanted to ask Rahul, what do you think keeps providers from being more competitive in their approach? Achint hinted at a few things, but I think it's a multifaceted challenge. And I wanted to see if you could share some of your experience with us on that.
Yeah. So I think carrying on with where Achint left, I think there are different types of scenarios, because of which we see that providers end up being non-competitive in competitive RFP situations. One point which he had kind of mentioned is that there are situations where providers actually could add a lot of buffer in their solutioning, in their pricing for a particular RFP, keeping in mind that hey, this is, let's say, the first round submission that we are submitting. As we proceed further, the client will obviously negotiate, and at that stage, we should have a buffer on which we can kind of go down and ultimately still come back with a win, with a price which meets our margin targets. We have seen that happening in quite a few cases. I think the idea is good generally, but where we have seen providers falter on that is that they just add too much of buffer, and they do not reach a stage where they actually get into the negotiations. They are the first ones out, from that particular RFP. The second one is essentially, when they just have got, let's say, a situation where the client has not shared too many details in a particular RFP. There are a lot of unknowns, and when coming up with the solution, when coming up with the pricing, the providers would justifiably add a fair number of contingencies. In the process, they would unknowingly become too conservative in their proposal and essentially uncompetitive, compared to the other suppliers which are also in the fray. Now, again, that's something which we have seen happen quite a few times. There are some providers who would actually take this very conservative approach, and then there are other situations, where other providers who actually end up moving further down the road in that particular RFP, they take a balanced approach between what kind of assumptions to clearly state and what kind of contingencies to build into their solutioning and pricing.
Mm-hmm.
The third one, actually, which we have seen is, and this is, in our view, the easiest to tackle, is that, they would have some internal guidelines saying that, hey, here is how we do the solutioning and pricing for this kind of an engagement. And they just go ahead with that, without really keeping in mind the specific requirements of a client or, whatever has been actually expressed pretty clearly in the RFP document. So it's essentially not giving enough attention to the detail which is already available, and hence submitting something which is not in line with what the client is expecting. And I think the fourth one, and which is again a pretty important one, is they simply do not know that they are doing something wrong. They have not done, let's say, the benchmarking from their own internal records, like Achin said, or they do not have a view of who they are up against in a particular RFP. What kind of behavior, would their competitors, typically show in this kind of an RFP, and hence, they are essentially going blind into it. They don't have the right intelligence. They just end up losing their way in the process. So I think those are the main reasons why we have seen, that uncompetitiveness in RFP situations.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're describing the dynamic that happens when a provider is involved with a particular pursuit, right? How they approach the client, how they think about their own guidelines, how they think about how aggressive or conservative they need to be. But I think it implies something else that's maybe even more profound. It implies that, and we've talked about this as a group, that a lot of times the winning of a deal happens before a particular deal is on the table, right? It has to do with addressing blind spots and addressing structural abilities to compete, right? And so this is where I was going to ask Abhishek to jump in. And if we could have the next slide come up, I think the kinds of conversations I've heard this team talk about have to do with how does one look at their readiness to compete, so that when a particular deal comes along, your platform, your threshold is strong to make that discernment of, do I pursue or not? So Abhishek, help us through that part of the conversation.
Absolutely, Katrina. The example I take is that this is a bit like participating in the Olympics, right? It's not about the 1 week before the event; it's about the 4, 7, 10 years before that, right? So there's to be successful on a pursuit, I think there's a lot of armory or arsenal which service providers need to put in place, and this could be multiple things, right? This could be things like a standard set of market compliant rates, right? Across services, across locations, across different types of skill sets, etc. Just so that there's a there's a reference, to make sure that the provider is not outpriced in the market, right? The example which I mentioned, the first one was really even in the first RFP stage, they were removed from the consideration set, right? So that would be kind of one. The other element is around we've seen generally that a lot of the service providers with generally high win rates invest a lot of time and effort in solution sizing and effort insights, right? The price rates are one part of it, but what's the solution, right? What's the solution sizing? How many people needed to deliver that? How that's commercially structured? What's the level of technology intervention, right? What's committed? What's not committed? There's just so much, which practically could have an impact, a significant impact on the total cost of ownership, for the client, right? So and these are not things which are done in last moment, right? So like you said, a lot of the preparation needs to happen beforehand. Now, even after a lot of the preparation, right, and there could be scenarios where there has not been time to prepare. Another area where providers do have the opportunity is to work with a set of SMEs, right, on a live bid support, right? Working with pricing solution SMEs to make sure that for that specific ask and for that specific competitive intensity, there are relevant insights on pricing and solution metrics, right? To make sure that the whole package and positioning and the messaging around it is aligned to what perhaps is in line with market norms. The biggest issue sometimes we see is that because a certain set of metrics or pricing may have worked smoothly till now, or in a number of scenarios, there's no guarantee that it's going to be working extremely well in different scenarios in the future. So it's important not just to sit on the existing data which firms may have internally. It's also important to juxtapose that with externally available data to make sure that there's no gaps in the solution.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I love that analogy. It's like the Olympics, right? We all watch these Olympics, the 2 weeks every 4 years, but
yeah,
the really moving part, the powerful part, is all the work that went into getting there when you're a 100-meter runner, right? It's 10 seconds of your life, but you spend 10 years getting there. So one of the questions that I often get from both analyst relations and advisor relations, colleagues out there in the marketplace is, how is Everest Group supporting deals today in the marketplace? And those of you that have known us through our history as a firm know that Everest Group was one of the founders and creators, really, under Peter Bender Samuel, of the third-party advisory business. And we grew that area for a number of years. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, we transitioned out of that business and transitioned those colleagues to a different firm by the name of Wavestone. And today, Everest Group is focused as a research organization. And since then, we've been communicating out into the market about what we focus on as a firm today and going forward. But I do continue to get questions. So I wanted to take this opportunity, since I have you on the conversation, that today, how is Everest Group working with both the buyers and the providers of services to enable productive deals in the marketplace? And if we could bring up the next slide, I think that'll help illustrate the point while we're talking. I'm not sure which of you wants to take that call.
I think, Katrina, what we can do here is we can talk about how we are supporting buyers first, and then the next page is more about how we support providers, right? So you are right. We sold off the classical, what people may relate to a transaction/deal business. Now think about advisory. There are two parts to it. One is more strategic, and the other part is running the deals itself, right? So strategic part of it, much is more to do with sourcing mix, about tech strategy, about your portfolio strategy, cost optimizations, or any kind of pricing monetization, uh, you know, mandates. That's the kind of work we have always been doing, and we have expanded significantly in that space, right? So advisory has two parts of it. This is the first part of it, that the more strategic work, more consultative work, more work that is related to the direct impact on the top line and the bottom line for buyers themselves. We are doing all that kind of work. In fact, supporting buyers on their captive setup journeys, helping them with the overall pieces around how do you think about location, how do you think about your workforce mix, how do you identify workloads that go to, let's say, those captives, right? I'm just taking one example here. So that's the kind of work we have been doing, and we are doing quite a lot, right? And then the other part of the business is the transaction business and running the deals, right? On that one also, we have been doing a lot of work. And Abhishek, you may want to add some color once I share,
Sure.
right? I mean, there are point evaluations of contracts that we do. We call it like an SPR, which is strategic proposal review. So let's say, for example, if there is an RFP, and the buyer comes to us for a commercial de-risking, right? They want to understand that, okay, what are the commercials being proposed to me? What is the solution being proposed to the client? Am I selecting the right vendor, right? I mean, because a lot of time these are vendor selection exercises. So we are helping on those mandates. There are a couple of mandates which we don't do anymore, which is different from a classical TPA business. And Abhishek, do you want to share that?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Achin. So like Achin mentioned, there's a lot of because see, one of the core things in any selection process is, are they getting the right deal, right? There's a number of other things which, let's say, the classic TPAs, for example, would do, but we are often engaged by our enterprise clients to support at different points. Are they getting, the right deal, right? And the pricing and commercials for outsourcing deals are never really as simple as buying a simple product. So that's one. I think the things that we would not do, just to be clear, are, for example, having huge teams fronting the sourcing process, for an enterprise, right? That's something perhaps which we would not do. But at specific points, helping clients think through the strategic elements, helping clients think through, what the proposals they've got, how do they compare against one another? Are there commercial risks associated? Doing that normalization, like for like comparison, is found to be super helpful, because many clients, truth be told, have their own teams, right? Which they've maybe hired from consulting firms who can still do a lot of that work themselves. It's that specific area where we would come in and help clients on that journey. So that does two things. One, I think it also is a major source for our data, right? That goes into our benchmarks, our analysis, any kind of pricing analytics. And second, of course, it's also very interesting, right, to work through different sourcing situations, being part of the overall decision making process, helping clients make the right decisions. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm sorry, the slides keep popping up and down. That's because I was thinking the conversation was headed in a different direction, but that's good. But I'm going to ask now. You've been talking about how Everest Group works with providers, and that's super helpful because we do a fair bit of that work. But as I mentioned in my remarks, we also do a fair bit of work with the providers in the marketplace, both technology services, BPS services, business process services, so forth. So I'm going to ask us to kind of look at that part of the equation as well. But before I do that, I do want to let our audience know that for their participation today, we appreciate your time. We are, the panelists you see here are pricing and commercial and solutions analysts will make themselves available for a one-on-one conversation. So if you're an analyst relations or an advisory relations professional and you want to start a conversation for yourself or for one of your stakeholders, one of your senior stakeholders in your lines of business, and that they're struggling with a particular challenge, our team is interested and available to schedule some time just to get to know the problem, get to know your organization. And so we'll let you know how to make that available, or we will let you know how to make that available towards the end of the call. But, oh, great. We have a link in our chat that you can click on. And just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so with that, how do you gentlemen want to tackle the topic of the provider side of the equation?
So let me kind of share my views on that. So Abhishek had already given a view of the different ways in which we work with service providers. The analogy around helping them prepare for the Olympics and not giving them support during the actual event which is kind of going on. So and that includes things like equipping them with benchmarks, the latest intelligence from deals that we have ourselves advised upon. So sharing benchmarks on the lines of price benchmarks, or let's say how to help them come up with the right guidelines for their internal teams who look at the solution sizing for a particular opportunity. So that's the part which I would classify as training before the actual event starts. But once the event is there, when they are in the midst of a particular RFP, what is it that we can support providers with? So yes, I think if we kind of bring up that slide now, there are multiple stages during a typical RFP, which all our audience would appreciate. So in some cases, they would know beforehand, that an important RFP is about to be released. Now, in such cases, what becomes necessary, or what becomes kind of a differentiating factor for the providers, could be to start developing intelligence in advance, about that particular client. So understanding, ahead of the actual RFP release, what are the different types of services which the client has already outsourced? What are the services which currently are in-house? For the ones which have been outsourced, what is the current size? For the ones which are not yet outsourced, what is the estimated size of the opportunity? If outsourcing has already been done, who are the current incumbents? What areas are they kind of delivering for the client already? What is the size of their wallet share? What can be some of the ways to preemptively start preparing for the RFP once it gets released? So those are important things to focus on even before the actual event starts. But during the time when the providers actually preparing the responses after the RFP release itself. Again, there are a lot of different aspects where providers may require help. So first of all, it could be around assessing how competitive is the overall fee that they plan to go ahead with in their proposal. And the overall fee is at a very high level, it's at the top level, but then at a grassroots level for different resource units, for different FTE roles, for various locations that are part of the scope, how does their pricing compare with the market benchmarks? With regard to things like the transition plan, the fee associated with transition, the SLAs that are getting proposed, the governance structure, all of these are areas, where again, benchmarks or the latest market intelligence can help them shore up the competitiveness of their proposal, as also, coming up with specific competitor battle cards, really identifying who are we up against, what are the strengths and weaknesses of those competitors, how can we tackle them, where are the areas that we need to attack, where are the areas where we need to defend strongly, so all of those are very important elements of the RFP strategy or the proposal strategy. And beyond that as well, after the proposal gets submitted, when it comes to doing solution defense, preparing for the oral meetings, preparing for the site visits, these are all areas where we have helped a lot of different types of service providers in different bids. And finally, at the final stage, when they are clearly one of the providers which have been down selected, to the BAFO round, and the discussions are going on around what is the final pricing negotiation, what are the what's the final contract going to look like, again at that stage, giving them the latest, the most accurate estimates of what would be the fee to go ahead with, what financial engineering measures can be deployed in order to meet the requirements of the client, what are the terms and conditions that they actually should be flexible on, meet the client's requirements, break the deadlock, and all of those aspects. There's a lot of interesting things that can be done for service providers. So yeah, so that this is all during the actual event, different types of support that can be provided.
Okay, so that's very helpful. I love this sort of deal flow or life cycle visual here, because it clearly shows sort of the points of insertion to think about of where Everest Group can help, and where we as a firm would not be the right support if you were looking for something outside of this. So I think one of the best ways, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's to illustrate some actual client scenarios, right? And so I think our next slide that we want to bring up, and Abhishek, I think you're going to be the one who is helping us through this, is a conversation around a particular client scenario that your team worked on recently. Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure, absolutely. So see, whenever it comes to our support or any service provider working on a particular pursuit or bid, the phrase I always use is the devil's in the detail, right? When we come, if we just take an example of any rate at a very simple level, brass tacks level, rates for a developer or a senior developer, a $1 to $2 difference here and there, right? Especially in offshore locations, could make a range of difference, right? So this was where in a highly competitive deal, right, we worked with, and of course this is anonymized, with a supplier kind of both A and B, right? So we worked with B to really help them fine tune specific rates, right, where they could kind of where they had a chance to maybe go higher, right, and where they had absolutely they would need to kind of reduce the rates to be overall in line with perhaps market median norms, right? And that's where we help them to basis the understanding of the industry, the work type, and the level of detail around specific role descriptions. Are there certifications required? Is there a particular years of experience mandate that they have? So fine-tuned all of that and get them something which they could of course, after their own due diligence, use as guidelines to take to the client. And yeah, I mean, the overall commercials were not only competitive, right? They looked well, that it went well with the messaging, but also delivered better margins, because as you see, as I said, that for some roles we actually recommended that they had a chance to increase the rate. So it's not always about really going through the lowest cost or lowest price provider. It's about smartly kind of going that way. The other element which we also helped them was with storyboarding, right? Thread reviews, and when they were positioning their differentiators, right? Some metrics, right? Whatever, all of that. Does that really build a cohesive story? Because again, the whole difference is, yes, they had experienced people in their organization, right? People who do this day in and day out. But the fact is that they are all within the organization, right? There's also an external point of view and a very objective point of view, because we don't have an axe to grind to show one agenda versus the other. We'll just say it like it is, right? And that's sometimes super helpful. And effectively, this did help this provider to kind of move forward and win, right? For a scope which was estimated to be around $30 million annually.
Okay, that's looking at it from the outside, not involved with the deal, even that, it's clear of how having very precise information about the realities on the ground makes a huge difference in terms of the competitiveness of the bid that the provider is presenting, but also the benefits of the overall deal to the client who needs to live with this for an extended period of time, and needs the confidence, right? They're making the right choice with the right vendor. So I guess that extra step in doing due diligence and refinement can have a big impact. Okay, great. So one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is, the role, pricing is a reflection of cost as well, right? It's just not the potential gain in the transaction for the provider, but what can they have, how do they structure a deal that's favorable to them and their own cost structure, right? And sometimes that can be a challenge. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how service providers can think about their margins and what have we observed through our work with the ability to influence margins, which then allow the deals to be more profitable for the provider side of the equation. And so I think, Rahul, you had some thoughts about that, and wanted to share, I guess, some illustration as well as part of your talking points.
Yes, Katrina. And it's a very important point, because on the one hand, while we equip a lot of service providers with what are the latest price benchmarks, that they should try to implement, in their proposals. The reality also is that for quite a few of the providers out there, the pricing is determined not by looking at benchmarks, but by also looking at what are the internal costs that they would be incurring, and then applying a margin on top. And if a particular margin target is not getting met, the pricing would not essentially get approved by the finance organization. So it becomes extremely important to look at the cost factors as well. So as sometimes we say, the way to price competitiveness is actually sometimes looking at your cost parameters, and we have kind of done this kind of work for a few players recently, where we identified that if, let's say, they were struggling with their margins, which they were realizing from deals, and if you kind of compared their margins with some of their peers, who essentially have the industry leading margin profiles, there are quite a few levers, which ultimately drive down the margins. So it could be, how they are structured internally in terms of the split of their resources across onshore, offshore, nearshore. If intrinsically they have a lot of presence at onshore, come what may, they cannot keep on proposing, high offshoring or nearshoring levels in deal after deal. And likewise, if it comes to, let's say, the choice of locations within a particular country, there could be situations where, peers are essentially leveraging tier two, tier three cities, to deliver a particular type of work, but, you know, this specific provider, let's say, does not have that kind of a presence. They only have presence in tier one cities. So again, a huge cost difference comes in at that stage itself. Or it could be various other levers, the payroll and the non-payroll costs, in very simple and absolute terms could be higher. The talent pyramids that they have, could be out of line with what the peers have. Peers might be having pretty well optimized pyramids, with a large number of junior people, but a particular provider may end up having a lot of senior people. That could be one important factor. The productivity gains that, the client, that the provider has kind of factored in could be another big factor. So all of these are very important levers. And in such cases, what we essentially do is benchmark each of these levers against the industry, the broader peer sets. And the benchmarks actually could be very, very service. They are very, very service dependent. They are sometimes very, very peer set dependent as well. For certain types of services, the right kind of peer sets could be the big consulting firms. For other types of services, the peer sets could be BPO specialist service providers, or let's say the tier two IT service providers. It all depends on what specific service is being looked upon. But net, this benchmarking does throw up a lot of interesting opportunities, in which providers can optimize their own internal cost profiles. And ultimately, that also becomes key in the long run to winning a larger number of deals at much improved margin profiles.
So this has been just such a helpful sort of masterclass on how to think about all the levers that affect competitiveness for a provider organization. So I wanted to kind of move away from the slides and get back to the mission that I outlined at the beginning of our call, which was, how have you been working with analyst relations teams, advisor relations teams? How have you found your experience, like the nature of the conversations to be? How have you found AR teams to employ best practices to supporting their teams? Any thoughts you have from your interactions on how our AR audience here can take this information and drive value for their organization?
Sure, I'll go first, and Rahul Lachan, please feel free to add on. I'll just start from the basics. The truth is that while across service providers we do work with multiple stakeholders, right, across some of the elements which Rahul mentioned, the fact remains that these are large organizations, right, and many stakeholders may not even be aware of the range of services which we provide, right? Okay, maybe the pricing teams know, or the commercial teams know, but there's a lot of, especially around live bids, for example, right? That's where one area where depending on the service provider, analyst relations colleagues have enabled being the connective tissue, right, to connect us to the right people as and when there is a bid, there's a requirement, and we could support on that, right? And these could be people within pre-sales, within sales, account leaders, who are really at the helm of those pursuits. So I think that would be definitely one area where we've had a lot of good success collaborating with with AR stakeholders, and of course on the lookout for more collaborative successes.
Abhishek, another area that we have been talking about right from the word go has been about solution sizing, right? Because ultimately, the number of wins you have and how you have been able to grow in that space. How do you have the vision? Do you have the technology in those in those areas? I think that also impacts the way you eventually you get reflected out in the market. A lot of time ARs need to start thinking about that. Are they bringing the right solutions out of the market? Are they talking about it? And if they have, are they sizing it to the right extent, right? Because ultimately, if your delivery teams, if your BU teams, if your pre-sales teams are not solutioning it the right way, eventually, no matter what you do, eventually, no matter what kind of assets or tools or marketing you end up doing about your area, it won't get translated into wins, right? Because solution can make the difference. A lot of providers who are fairly large today are struggling to win deals in spite of having very competitive pricing, right? And I think, in my opinion, that has everything to do with the solution that they bring to the table.
Which I would like to add is, when we see the bid teams and service providers interact with us, there's always this sense of urgency that, hey, we're in the middle of this RFP, and already 2 weeks, 3 weeks have passed. We only have 1 week left. Can you come in and look at our proposal and tell us where are the areas that we should improve? I think the stumbling block, that we have seen in such cases is that 1 week sometimes is not sufficient, for the simple legal and paperwork, to happen. By the time there is alignment on what needs to be done, and when it comes to signing the basic SOWs, a lot of time gets lost, and by the end of it, hardly a couple of days are left. So, I mean, my wish and my request would be to, for the AR teams to take a slightly longer term and futuristic view, discuss with leaders of the bid teams, in how many opportunities over the next 6 months, over the next 12 months, they would expect to take support from, a firm like us. And in advance of the actual bids, identifying, what is a suitable arrangement, and essentially signing off on it, because when that need actually arises, there is no time to do all of that work, and that becomes the stumbling block. So let's get that out of the way in advance, so that when the need arises, we can straight away jump onto it and start supporting the teams.
Yeah, I think, Rahul, you echoed what I was thinking. So I know that a lot of our AR audience, their organization really has a few priorities for them, right? They want to make sure that the assessments that they participate in are done well, the right ones are participated in, they're positioned well, and that takes up a lot of bandwidth for AR teams and professionals. Similarly, there's a lot of inquiries out there that have to do with the project at hand or the client issue at hand, and the AR team gets pulled into that. However, I sense that there's a movement among AR professionals to not only do these core project or operational aspects of AR well, but what can AR do to drive more strategic value for their organizations? And in my mind, what you talked about in terms of starting ahead and having conversations, planting seeds, helping educate organizations about what's available to them broadly in perhaps a research relationship that you already have, like with Everest, but in an area that maybe you haven't explored. So the AR person who's aware of the challenges that their organization is facing and the resources that potentially could help solve those challenges, that's a long-term discussion to have. You need to find the champions in your organization, maybe that are open to those kinds of conversations, right? So by no means is this a silver bullet, and it's something that you're going to build into your workflow today or tomorrow. But if the aspiration is to support the competitiveness of the organizations, that's a long-term effort, right? And it's not so much, I think, the conversation being, what deals did you bring for me? Because I know some of you are asked those questions, what deals did you bring to me? But it's more of like, I can help you be better at the deals you do have and be prepared for when the deals do come. That's how I'm seeing the framework here. So I hope you all found this a good use of your time. I want to thank my colleagues, Abhishek Sharma, Achint Arora, and Rahul Gehani, for your time and your knowledge and your expertise. If you would like more time with these gentlemen, just a reminder that we will communicate with you after this call, or you can look in the chat right now, and there's a link that would allow you to request some one-on-one chat time to kind of learn more about what you've been hearing today. And wanted to thank you as our participants for joining us. And a reminder that this will be available on the Everest Group LinkedIn page for you to share or watch again later on. So with that, I don't know if anybody else among my colleagues has any parting words, but I think we're getting ready to sort of wrap up. We're all set? Okay, everyone. No matter where you are in the world, have a good day, evening, afternoon, and we'll connect again when we do the next quarterly LinkedIn Live for AR audiences. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.